So the first question we want to answer today, before we dive into any of the sciencey stuff, is why is understanding my nervous system relevant? Why should I even care about the nervous system? Now, as an entrepreneur, somebody in business, understanding you, I believe, will help you better manage stress and the challenges of life in a much more easeful way, even to thrive and grow when shit seems to be hitting the fan. And this is going to allow you to work with your system, that is basically your interface and is controlling how you perceive the world, and not to be working against your system or in spite of your system. Now, I just want to give a little preface on this. I was the guy who dropped out of science in school as soon as I could because I just didn't find it interesting. I thought it's not relevant. Why should I even bother to learn that? And being able to understand what was happening in my body and my nervous system by learning this information, like, truly changed my life and really just lit me up from the very first moment. As what I recognized was that by really learning and understanding and embodying this information, it allowed me to become more of my kind of fullest self and to live my life to the fullest and to really maximize my potential that without realizing I was suppressing, and I was living in these ways that felt like it was my potential, but it really wasn't. Just because my nervous system didn't feel safe to do certain things or live in certain ways because of what might happen. And we're going to get into how that happens in this episode, but that's just an overview. The long story short is understanding this information will possibly quite potentially change your life, and it definitely worked for me, so I hope it works for you too. Now, the main topic of today is what the hell is the nervous system? What does that mean? Now, maybe you've got some ideas of what you think it is. It sounds like, I know, being nervous, so maybe something to do with feeling. People think it's like something to do with the brain, or, you know, we've got nerves in our body. Is that it? I'm just going to break it down right from like 101 level and build up from there. So first things first, the nervous system is the command center or the interface that is controlling how we perceive both our outer and our inner world. So that's the thing that if it's affected, or if there's an issue or problem with our nervous system and how we're taking information and, you know, receiving it and processing it and then acting upon it, that can really change totally how we make decisions and how we experience both our internal and external world. So it's pretty important, as you can imagine. Now, the nervous system is responsible for controlling all of the functions in our body, and it's made up of two main parts. So again, I'm going to keep this super simple, nothing too crazy, only the essentials you need to know. So the two main parts of the nervous system, number one is what's called the central nervous system. So that's like the command center. That's like home base, and that's the one that basically all the signals have been sent back to, and it's like the motherboard, where basically, you know, it's receiving information and then it's deciding what to do and then sending out information. And that is basically our brain and our spinal cord running down our back. And that's a constant source of receiving information, okay? And then sending out signals again. Now, the second part of the nervous system is called the peripheral nervous system, and that is all the parts that are outside of the brain and spinal cord. So everything else that stretches to every other part of our body, and they are nerves branching out all over us and are sending information and receiving information all the time, okay? Now, as part of our peripheral nervous system, we've got this thing called the autonomic nervous system. Now, there's basically two parts of this peripheral nervous system, and the other one is called the sensory nervous system. Now, if I was to say to you, okay, you're sitting there listening to this episode, put your hands in the air, okay? And you consciously lifted up your hands, that would be you using your somatic nervous system. You'd be consciously, with your conscious mind, raising your hands in the air. Now, if I jumped out at you and shouted, ah, and scared you, then your reaction that you wouldn't even notice was happening would be coming from this other part, which is called the autonomic nervous system. And that is the most relevant for what we're going to talk about today. Now, the autonomic nervous system is the thing that's controlling the function of pretty much everything we do, from our thoughts, our memory, our five senses, our heartbeat, our sleep, our digestion, and even how we age and grow. And all those body processes that happen are as a result of the autonomic nervous system. Now, when I say autonomic, you can also think of the word automatic, because it's all happening without thinking. Like, luckily, you don't have to think about, you know, smell and, you know, digesting your food or your heart beating, because if you had to think about those things all the time in order for them to work, you wouldn't last very long. So thankfully, the autonomic nervous system takes care of all those things. Now, another really important part of the autonomic nervous system, which we haven't mentioned, but is really key component to what we're talking about today, is the breath. Now, the breath is the one part that's part of both the somatic and the autonomic, where I can consciously tell you, take a deep breath, Let it go. And that's the part of your nervous system that's conscious. However, up until this point, you were still breathing, but you weren't thinking about it. And that's really interesting because that's how breath can be the window between these two worlds, our conscious and our subconscious nervous system, which could also be called our conscious and subconscious mind. Now, we're going to go one level deeper here. You ready for that? That's the overview of the nervous system, but we're going to go more specifically into the autonomic nervous system now and the two branches or the two families within that. Now, you may have heard of these before. The sympathetic is the activation part of our autonomic nervous system. So that's the part of us that is more towards fight or flight, towards doing, action, activation. And then the other part is called the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's more around the rest and digest and relaxation and downshifting and just being at ease. That's the parasympathetic system. And ideally, we would pulse between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic on a day-to-day basis. So think about it, you wake up in the morning, there's an initial spike of energy as you jump out of bed, and then maybe you do some stuff, and then you sit down and meditate. Now, the meditating would be dropping down more into parasympathetic. Then afterwards, you have a coffee, and you get out the door, and you go to work, and you're doing things. That's, again, activation, so we're heightened again. And then afterwards, we drop down. After lunch, maybe we have a bit of a lie down or a nap. That's relaxation, parasympathetic. And then after work, you go to the gym and you're working out, Now you're in sympathetic. Then you come home and you have dinner and then you sit down and watch Netflix. And that's been parasympathetic again. So we're kind of ideally moving between these two states, sympathetic and parasympathetic dominant throughout the day. Now, that's all great in theory, but in reality, that's not always how it plays out. So think about this. When you were born and you came, into this world, you were a blank slate, okay? You kind of like the same way that when you were born, you could have learned any language, like you could have learned Chinese or Swahili, depending where you were born in the world, but you probably learned English if you're listening to this and maybe some other native language from your country. But the idea is that we're shaped by our external environment very quickly. So as I'm born, my nervous system is basically a blank slate. And I could learn to live or breathe in many different ways, but I typically start to very quickly take on the environment in which I'm brought up. So think about it like this. If I was born on a farm, okay, in the middle of nowhere, countryside, just a couple of cows hanging out, probably my nervous system, what feels normal to me, will be quite relaxed. I'm used to everything very peaceful and not much is happening. It's a slow pace of life. So my nervous system will be more used to the parasympathetic side of things. Now, if I was born in the middle of Fifth Avenue in Manhattan in New York, okay, guess what? My nervous system, in order to feel normal and get through and survive, it would need to be at just a much higher state all the time. Okay, so what feels normal to me or like home to me is going to be much more high tone. Now, high tone means that my nervous system is operating in a much higher level. So I'm much more in this sympathetic, go, 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 fight or flight all the time. And that just feels normal. That's just what I'm used to because that's all I've ever known. So that's just how the world feels to me. Now, what happens is, right, even though we would ideally move between these two states into sympathetic activation and then rest and relaxation, parasympathetic, what can actually happen is because of our environment that we're brought up in, we can learn to live in a state that's maybe more activated or higher than maybe what would be optimal for our system. So maybe what we consider to be relaxation isn't actually relaxing. Now, you might hear people say, I just want to unwind, so they're going to go to like a nightclub and drink bottles, you know what I mean? And to them, that could be relaxing. It could be coming down instead of working 14-hour days. But actually on the scale of things, they're not dropping into deep rest. They're just like in a slightly less activated state, and they're calling that rest. Now, that develops what's called a fake baseline, where basically what feels like home or what feels normal is much more activated and much higher than what ideally it would be for longevity and long-term health in our system. Now, what happens when the person from the farm goes to New York? Well, they feel overwhelmed because there's too much stimulus, it's noisy, it's loud, it's too much, okay? And it overwhelms their nervous system. It's too much for them. What happens if the person from New York goes to the farm? Well, they're bored, they don't like it, there's nothing to do here, there's no action. They want to get back to the city and drink a triple espresso and go for it. That's because their nervous system does not feel comfortable to be in a state that's so far away from its home. So the first question for you is, would you say your nervous system is more conditioned to be in the farm, this deep relaxation, hanging out with cows, Or would you say it's more likely to be up around the New York City level of go, 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 and the idea of relaxing, truly relaxing, is actually quite scary? Something to consider. Now, if you're an entrepreneur or a founder or someone who works, in quite a high level in business, and you've never consciously, gone and done a meditation retreat for 2 years, which is most people, then chances are you're more likely to be on the sympathetic side of things. And that's just how our society mostly operates in the Western world. We are conditioned to go, go, go and do more and experience more. And even on our time off, we're still going. And even when we're at home, we're still activated, looking at our phones, scrolling on social media, and, watching very stimulating content. So, think about neuroplastically, if we adjust to our environment over time, what happens if you're constantly living in this activated fight or flight state? It needs to happen at some point because, we need to, as an entrepreneur, maintain that high level of go, go, go in order to get the things that we really want to have in life. So, such as financial freedom, let's say. I need to work hard, and, the David Gogginses of the world will tell you, work harder, bitch, and just don't stop pushing. But I can tell you that David Goggins probably doesn't have much access to his parasympathetic nervous system, because once we get so used to living up here all the time, activation, it's very hard to switch off because our system becomes just habituated or conditioned to always just be on. Now, how that would show up in someone's system would be over time, basically chronic stress or anxiety, where they're in high activation but unable to switch off and rest. Because there's nothing wrong with stress, it's how we actually grow, but only if it's been balanced by appropriate rest afterwards. So, me, I go to the gym, I work hard, I work out, I push my limits, and then afterwards I go and maybe have a sauna or, a relaxation, and then I have a good sleep, 10 hours and a good nourishing meal, and then I have a rest day the next day. Chances are my body and my muscles will grow from that experience. However, if I go to the gym 4 times a day and just push, and then stay up all night playing video games, chances are I'm not going to experience much muscle growth because I've got a buildup of stress without appropriate balancing rest. Now, what this can do, whether it's gym work or, being on your laptop for 10 hours a day working and getting things done and just being on all the time, is our body starts to produce this hormone called cortisol. Now, cortisol is there basically as a way to deal with stress. And we've got adrenaline as well, which puts us into action. Now, the cortisol that's produced when our body is under stress, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing that's in our body to help us meet the challenges of life. But it's only when we never drop down into parasympathetic that can lead to a buildup of cortisol over time. And that can lead to then ultimately decaying, illness, disease in later life, because we're never really getting this proper digesting, restful state where we really recharge and heal our bodies. And the other thing negatively that can happen with this is we lose access to this relaxation response, but we still need to take the edge off. So that's how people can become addicted to, alcohol or porn or eating or even drugs or social media, or just anything that allows us to avoid our experience because we don't want to feel it, but we've lost the ability to just naturally downshift by ourselves. So that's how our past and our conditioning and our upbringing and how we're living day to day can affect our bodies and our nervous system. But what we want to look at finally now in this episode is, how does breath affect that? And how can we use breath to affect and change the state that we're in to get access to more of this parasympathetic state? Because you can start to hear that's probably something we'd want to at least part-time intentionally tap into, so we can take all that stress and use it to grow instead of to burn out and crash. So what we're going to do now is a little exercise. So if you're driving a car, maybe do this with your eyes open, but in general, I would like you to close down your eyes or just take a moment for yourself where you're not being disturbed. And what we're going to do is we're going to take 10 breaths in. We're going to do what's called a physiological sigh. So we're going to take a full inhale in through the nose. And once you reach the top, you're going to take a small sip and just really fill the lungs to the top. And then at the end, you're going to let go with a big sigh through the mouth. Okay? Now, this breath has been proven to be more effective at downshifting the body than meditation. Okay? And it's doing so by activating our body's natural sigh response, which is, if you think about it, you come home from a long day at work, what do? You're just ready to unwind. And that's the body's natural way of downshifting itself. So what we're doing is we're basically hacking the body, and we're doing that intentionally to create that same parasympathetic response. So let's try it now. We're going to go in 3, 2, 1, full inhale through the nose, and sip, letting go. And exhale all the way to the bottom. Next breath, breath in and sip. And again, full inhale through the nose and sip. Full inhale, sip. Halfway there, keep finding that full inhale and sip. Take a second longer at the bottom here. Full inhale and sip. 3 more. Full inhale through the nose. Sip. 2 more times. Full inhale and sip. And last time, full inhale in and a sip and let it go. And all the way to the bottom. Once you reach the bottom of your breath, just pause at the bottom. No need to inhale for a moment. And with no breath in your lungs, just noticing what you're noticing in your body. Let your shoulders be heavy. Let your head be heavy. Your face relaxed. And taking a moment for yourself here as you take one breath in and let it go. So as you can feel, doing these kinds of intentional breathing exercises can be super beneficial to quickly change our state and bring us back into the present moment and basically down into this more parasympathetic state. So what we're doing then is we're moving from breath being an unconscious automatic process into something we can control. Now, one step better than doing a quick fix exercise like that, which is called a mind-based breathing exercise, is to do a body-based breathing technique, which is what we love to do at Really Align. We use the technique called conscious connected breathing, which is basically where you lie down for an hour and let the body breathe and take over and to kind of go on this journey by itself. Now, that's a way that instead of like just having a quick, downshift and then you go back to your day, this is a way to actually not just have a full dump of cortisol out of your system, but to actually retrain the body and the nervous system how to re-access this parasympathetic state every single day. So just like you can go to the gym and you can train a new movement pathway, and maybe at the start you don't have much strength, you're not very good at it, but after a while you get really good at doing a certain movement with weight. There's a way that we can actually train our body to much quicker, automatically access these very deep states of rest and relaxation. And that's something that we love to train and work on with our clients in sessions with connected breathwork. It's kind of like the teach a man to fish approach. And the good news is that it doesn't actually take super long to do that for most people, because the idea is if you've been driving for 1 hour every day through traffic, through the center of the city, and you think that's the only way I can go because this is how I have to get to work. And then I show your body a much easier route, 30 minutes through a nice field with a waterfall and flowers. How many times do I need to show your body the more easy route before it just starts taking that every single day, this 30-minute nice easy route? And that kind of is the same with connected breathwork, where we can remind the body of how it used to breathe many, many years ago, before we were conditioned to live in these very high-toned stress states, like living in the middle of New York. And we can remind it of what's ability on the other end of the spectrum, this parasympathetic system. And that is the power of the breath, and that's what allows us to do when we start to understand what the nervous system really is. So once we have that down, we can go on and start to build our capacity to be with more stress and take on more and expand what feels comfortable in our body and deal with the challenges of life in a better way, while also expanding our limits and handling our emotions better and, just really growing fully in all areas as a person. And that is what we're going to cover in the next 2 parts of this 3-part series. So I hope you've enjoyed this part 1 and digested some of this information. And as always, if you're curious to learn more, you can reach out, find us on LinkedIn at Really Align, Instagram at Really Align, or you can shoot us a private message, email at contact@reallyaligned.com. We're going to have a masterclass on there soon, going much deeper into all these topics. And if you're listening to this, there's a good chance that also episode 2 could be coming out very soon in this series. So stay tuned for that as well. Now, have a wonderful day.